So we can start with the US. I know the President Trump is very anxious to have the country reopened, but of course he has to acknowledge the fact that he cannot order governors of all the statesmen to follow what he wants.
This is so true because before we can make America great again, we have to open up America again. So opening up America again is the name of the new guidelines issued by President Donald Trump, issued to all the state governors. So the new guidelines is for each state to loosen their own restrictions based on what they're doing right now during the pandemic. So the main purpose of these guidelines is to quickly revive the economy that has been hard hit by the pandemic.
And what's the guideline that's coming up from President Trump, Nad?
So the guidelines are split into 3 phases. So before proceeding to each phase, all states and regions must meet the gating criteria. So within a 14-day period, that particular state must have a decreasing number of COVID-19-like cases, including influenza-like illnesses, as well as positive tests and documented cases. So all of these must decrease first before moving on to phase 1, phase 2, and then phase 3. So let's start with phase 1. So the guidelines for phase 1 actually stated that all vulnerable individuals, which means elders and people with serious health conditions, should stay at home, as well as maximizing social distancing. Schools and bars must still be closed, but gyms can be reopened if they actually follow the protocols, whether it's the social distancing and sanitization protocols. For phase 2, it's quite similar to phase 1, but the non-essential travel can resume back to normal, and some venues can also be reopened if they follow the protocols. And moving on to phase 3, this is where all the restrictions are already eased. So all vulnerable individuals can go out, but they still have to practice social distancing, as well as others who are at low risk. They are actually advised to spend less time in crowded places, but all venues can resume operations as normal.
Yes, Kunat, and we know the situation between President Trump and governors of each state. Does it mean that he will order all the states to comply with the guidelines?
The truth is, state governors already have the power and the authority to decide whether they should remain on lockdown or they should ease restrictions. But the way Trump has said during the announcement that, if they need to remain closed, we will allow them to do that, this suggests that Trump still believes that he has the authority when in fact all the governors have their own authority to do by themselves.
So that's a big question, because Trump has been insisting that he has authorities over governors, but that is something that has been disputed. And eventually, if you read the guidelines carefully, they are more sort of a voluntary than mandatory. So that means that the state governors will have the final say on whether or not or when to ease these restrictions based on readiness or on the degree of their success in dealing with the situation.
Exactly, because the governors actually know best, to be fairly honest. So they are the ones who can actually decide whether to stay on lockdown or to ease restrictions, because if they're the governor of that state, they know exactly what is going on and how severe the situation is. So they're the ones who can decide whether they should adapt those guidelines or whether to reopen the economy as soon as possible. So it's all up to them, not really the president.
Has there been any reaction from the governor of New York, Andrew Cuomo, who doesn't see eye to eye with the president on this issue?
I haven't really seen the response yet, but there are responses from other governors. So, for example, in the Midwest, there are 7 governors who decided to work together in terms of planning to reopen the economy. So that includes Michigan, Ohio, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Illinois, Indiana, and Kentucky. So these 7 governors will work together on reopening the economy. But that doesn't mean that they will all reopen all at once, but they're just working together so that they're all on the right track. Governors in other states such as Hawaii, Vermont, and West Virginia, which has lower infection cases, are still a bit reluctant, and they haven't really expressed their desire to reopen their economy yet.